All right, all right. Happy Friday, guys. Welcome to Sabs podcast. My special guests tonight are Gina and Joey Peltier. They are community organizers and distant relatives of Native American activists and longest sitting U.S. political prisoner Leonard Peltier. Thank you both so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. You do so much amazing, important work, and I know you're so busy, and I'm just honored that you took the time to have us in your space. Thank you so much.
Thank you much for having us. Your amazing interview yesterday with Dr. West was outstanding. I loved all of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. So I want to start off discussing water protection. So I know that both of you are community organizers and activists. I want to start off with Standing Rock. For those who are not aware, this was another action. This action took place in the Dakotas. So there have been different pipelines that have been, or the government has tried to put through. Standing Rock is one of the ones that I feel did not get enough mainstream media attention. If it had not been for people like Nico House, Status Quo, I wouldn't have known that Standing Rock was even happening, to be honest with you. They covered that extensively. So shout out to them for doing that. But in reference to water protections, if we're starting off with Standing Rock, could you explain to everyone, how did this all start to begin with? And I know that they decided not to go through with it, but how did this all start out to begin with? And what was it that brought the community together to protest against it?
Yeah, I'll start if I may. Water is life, and, there is no life without water. We all need it to survive. And so they've been putting in these fossil fuel pipelines all throughout Mother Earth for quite some time now. And, we never needed fossil fuels to begin with. We all know Henry Ford's first automobiles ran off of hemp fuel. Whole body was made of hemp steel. So we've always had other resources to use, better resources to use. But with the story of Standing Rock and No Dapple, they came in and wanted to do a replacement. And when they first initially had the plans, it was going north of the city of Minot. And so the community members of Minot said that, no, we don't want this pipeline going through our water, so put it somewhere else. So Dakota Access Pipeline, and also in partnership with Enbridge Corporation, then decided, okay, well, we'll just move it, but we'll move it where it goes above Standing Rock Reservation. So that means that, well, then, they really don't give us a say, and there shouldn't be like that much governmental pushback. And so they move forward with putting this poisonous, toxic pipeline through a very important water system for the tribe. And, if there were to be a spill, it would be really hard for them to get accountability on that. Joey, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I know it's been a long day for you, sister, but that was actually Bismarck.
Bismarck. Okay.
Yep.
Bismarck.
And Bismarck was able to have the environmental impact statement through NEPTA, which is the National Environmental Protection Act. And what that allowed was the community to have a discussion on if this project gets to be put through Bismarck or not. And that's part of the process with NEPTA itself. And through their process, they got to vote and say, no, we're not going to have this pipeline through Bismarck. And then, as Gina finished out, the pipeline company, Dakota Access Pipeline, along with the shareholders, decided to put it through indigenous land, as we've been historically an easier target for these extractive industries and these toxic environmental harm. Through NEPTA, although our findings through the tribe of Standing Rock, through their environmental impact statement, it wasn't able to be allowed in court. And then I know that Standing Rock also fought legal battles through treaties that were superseded by the Clean Waters Act, gifting the waterways of America to the National Guard. And that's who got in on that, was the National Engineering, well, excuse me. But yeah, that hammered in through Standing Rock. Do you think I covered? We had a 10-year battle with that. Within 2012, Obama came into Standing Rock. Correct me if I'm wrong, folks in the chat, but it was 2012 or 2014 when Obama came in there and said he wasn't going to do the pipeline. And then it took him up until November 2016, when he knew that he wasn't going to get elected, to actually put a pause on that pipeline, allowing a lot of that to be reversed with the next administration, Donald Trump, which we saw right afterwards when Donald Trump took office, that he reversed all the environmental protections that Obama put forth.
So I'm curious, because I guess I was under the perception, and this is my own ignorance here, I was under the perception that indigenous land, or like reservations, the government could not touch that land, but it appears that's not necessarily the case.
A lot of times those battles end up in court. All of our battles end up in court, and it has a lot to do with tribal sovereignty and our treaty rights. We are technically a quasi-sovereign nation. All of our nations, the 580 plus indigenous nations of Turtle Island, and we all have different treaties written in with different negotiations between the nations and the greater nation, the United States itself. So we do have the strongest property laws within the nation. I mean, we supersede all of our farming property laws. We actually we predate the United States Constitution. That's why they had to write it into the Constitution itself. So you're right, but it's the matter of enforcing those laws and the political will to actually do something about it.
Yes, and the United States has never kept any of the treaties that were signed. The tribal nations, the land is supposed to be even greater than what they are now. And that is part of the land back, like, give us the land back because you're poisoning it, give it to the original caretakers so we can put it back the way it was. But yeah, they've never honored the treaties, and they've just kept taking land and using their laws to open it up for homesteaders and stuff like that. And when originally indigenous people were allowed to own land, there were laws that made it that we couldn't be stewards over land. So we had to have, like a white person control our finances and our land and make those decisions on behalf of us, because we weren't technically citizens. And so we had to have those people step in for us.
We weren't technically full humans, Gina.
Yes.
It was through the doctrine of discovery through the Catholic Church that allowed a lot of that legislation to be put forward. And since now the Pope has rescinded that doctrine of discovery, which says that indigenous people are, 2/3 human, rescinding that allows us as tribal nations to go in there and reassess a lot of those old standing laws that have taken custodialship over our lands in our ceded territories.
What about the local politicians? Like, where do they stand on this? Because I feel like there needs to be some type of push for them to get them to make sure that these treaties are honored to begin with in the first place. Where do they stand on these issues? Where do they stand on an issue like Standing Rock? Were there politicians that were present at the protest?
Well, Dr. Cornell West was there. We had a lot of the squad starting their political careers within our camps themselves. AOC, Ilhan Omar, Cori Bush, they started their political careers within the same camp with Shailene Woodley. And as for the treaty rights, it's been an ongoing conversation for generations with our local politicians, our national politicians, and our tribal politicians, because our tribes, they have to be governed a certain way under the way that the government has set out for us to get our
rights, our entitled treaty rights.
Yes, our entitled treaty rights.
I'm sorry, my brother. If I can just chime in too, I think a lot of people are uneducated about treaties also. There's a lot of education saying that, we had Thanksgiving and we just gave them the land and everything's all hunky-dory, when in actuality, that's not how it was. You had indigenous tribes who were on this land for thousands and tens of thousands of years, and contrary to popular belief, we were a key species. We cultivated gardens and we farmed the land where we didn't take any nutrients out of the soil, and we had civilization and systems set up to hold people accountable. And so when people, even think about indigenous laws and rights and stuff like that, they're very uneducated and uninformed. That there are these treaties out there, then that's why there are reservations. A lot of the treaties were signed is because indigenous people, we just want to live as good neighbors. We want to be able to take care of ourselves as Mother Earth intended. And, when European settlers came over, the colonizers came over, they were bent on destruction, basically taking the land and using it for their own and not caring who they destroy in the past. So after many years of fighting, they finally found out that, hey, you can't take us out that easily. So let's trick them into signing these treaties saying, hey, you can live on this plot of land and we'll live on this plot of land and we'll live as good neighbors. And you can keep your rights to hunt, gather, and fish and do your ceremony. And then after those treaties were signed, the United States government never followed them. I mean, it was illegal for an indigenous person to speak the language and to practice their religious beliefs and the culture up until it was finally made legal in the 1970s. Indigenous people were arrested and beaten, and our children were taken away from us and put in boarding schools where they were forced not to speak their language and not to be who they are. And they were just brutally abused into being into a system where it's just a very oppressive system. And it's really, really sad.
Yes, I agree 100%. And then it didn't end with Standing Rock. After Standing Rock, there was Line 3. So this was another pipeline that the government was trying to put through. I remember I talked about this briefly when there was a confrontation in reference to Amy Klobuchar. She was actually campaigning, and there were protesters that came to her campaign announcement or one of their campaign events, and they said, stop Line 3, because apparently part of that went through Minnesota as well. But again, another pipeline that they were trying to put through that obviously was going to impact indigenous land. So for me, it's just what I want people to really understand. Had it not been for the protests, especially at Standing Rock, and had it not been for independent media being there on the ground because mainstream media didn't want to cover it, that probably still would have went through. And it's not just the Dakotas, and we'll get to Line 3 in just a second. It's not just the Dakotas, but it's also the Appalachia. I don't know if some people say
Mountain
Appalachia.
Valley Pipeline.
That's right. Another pipeline that they're trying to put through. And again, you don't see these pipelines go through rich communities or white communities. They're usually trying to put these pipelines through indigenous communities or Black communities. Like there's a lot of environmental pollution that's happening, and it's usually happening to people of color or people that are poor or people that are working class. Like rich people don't have to worry about these issues. And I wonder with you, like in reference to Line 3, did you feel like this particular pipeline received enough attention? I felt like mainstream media covered this a little bit more, but not to the point that it should have.
Yeah. Oh, if I may, I'm sorry. Line 3 did not receive the media it needed to receive at all. Line 3 is going through nearly half of North America's fresh water. It's going through 200 bodies of water and through 200 river crossings. And they didn't even have to leak oil to poison the water. Just fracking out and then breaching the aquifers poisoned the water to where you can't even swim in it. June of 2021, we occupied and stopped construction for 8 days, occupied an Enbridge easement over the Mississippi River. And hundreds of us drank the water out of the Mississippi River in that location, and we did not get sick. And we and our children swam that river. And after our occupation, Enbridge successfully shoved that tar sand oil pipeline through the Mississippi, fracked out toxic, poisonous chemicals. And not only that, they breached an aquifer. So when they breached the aquifer, the water forced all those chemicals out beyond where it was leaking out. And so it poisoned the water in the Mississippi, where our fish developed blisters and they died. You can no longer even step foot in that river without developing a horrible rash. And it's really concerning because at the same time, Minnesota Governor Walz approved of these permits for this pipeline that's threatening nearly half of North America's freshwater. Water became a commodity on Wall Street. This is the last of Canada's oil that's flowing through Line 3. A lot of us feel that, they're looking for a new way to make money, and Line 3 was originally supposed to go through Canada, and Canada's like, no, we don't want that through here. So why not put a toxic tar sands oil pipeline through nearly half of North America's freshwater, make it scarce, poison it, and then make money off the scarcity of water? It's completely ridiculous. And most of that oil that is flowing through Line 3 is being sold to China. So China can make plastics out of it. And anything that's made out of plastic can be made out of hemp. And, that's another reason that, I keep showing up and doing these interviews. I get so nervous, speaking out and stuff like that. But there is hope. We can do stuff to even fix the climate change that's happening, the catastrophes. Scientists predicted with breathtaking accuracy the devastation that using fossil fuels would do. And they still continued to move forward and use them, and we didn't need them. And, these same scientists say we have less than 10 years left to make a drastic change. And we're capable of doing that. We saw with the pandemic that we don't have to be driving back and forth to work every day and going all these places. And then that too, with hemp, you can make anything out of hemp, build houses out of hemp. Mm-hmm. Hemp restores nutrients to the soil. The topsoil in the United States is depleting nutrients drastically because of the industrial farming practices. And then on top of that, hemp can clean the air. It's an excellent carbon sequestration. 1 hectare of industrial hemp can absorb 15 tons of CO2 per hectare. Hemp's rapid growth makes it one of the fastest CO2 to biomass conversion tools available. It's more efficient than the agroforestry. So, we have the capabilities and the technology to save the world, basically, but all these politicians are focusing on furthering the fossil fuel development when that is not what we need at all. Biden even the approval of the Willow project up in Alaska. Yep. That is just detrimental. That project threatens to unleash 260 million metric tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, in the next 30 years. And we can't be having that happen. We have less than 10 years to make a drastic change. So, it's just time for us to really be aware and it's a sense of urgency, because we can change it. We just need to all come together and take to the streets and talk to your mama about it. I even talked to the people who changed my oil about it. We can do this. We can change this catastrophe that's unfolding in front of our eyes.
Right. This is important because I think, at least for me, by the time I found out about Line 3, by the time I found out about the water in Flint, the damage had already been done, at least in reference to Flint. The people were already, poisoned. The people were already sick. But that was, I found out about it after those things had started to happen. Jackson, Mississippi, their water also contamination. Luckily, I did find out about that when it happened. But I honestly think that we have to continue to inform people that these things are going on, because mainstream media is not doing their job in reference to this. Look at what's happening right now with East Palestine, Ohio. Mainstream media talked about it for a little bit in the beginning, and now you don't really hear them saying anything about it. The president of the United States hasn't even made an appearance there. When you talk about the Willow Project, that's also indigenous land. And what's really upsetting about the Willow Project is that one of the politicians that approved it is indigenous. You may be familiar with who I'm referring to. I forget her name, but I was really like appalled, like just shocked and appalled. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yep, I'm very angry about that one. Of all people to back a project like that, Deb Haaland, is just really disheartening. You know, there's 2 billion people around the world that don't have access to clean, safe drinking water. You know, that's like 46% of the world's population lack adequate sanitation services, and half the global population could face water scarcity challenges by 2025. I mean, you have the Colorado River, one of the most important river systems in the country, that's drying up at an alarming rate. It's super scary.
And on your notion that we didn't get enough attention, they didn't come until about the tail end of our movement, until weeks until that they were done actually putting in the pipeline itself. Not to say that we hadn't made national news. A handful of our indigenous water protector women were on, what was it, the New York Post front page. Mm-hmm. And then Gina herself has made Miss Magazine, and we've been interviewed by national media here and there. But every time we do get something covering us, it's either in like deep into the newspaper, or it's just briefly covered and not actually nationalized on national media itself. Amy Goodman, of course, has covered Line 3 extensively.
Right.
I can't give as much credit to Amy Goodman and the work that she's doing over in Democracy Now! But for the most part, you know, you said that this has started in Standing Rock, and in all realities, this has been 500 plus years of indigenous resistance. And, you know, I think of my elder, rest in peace, John Trudell, who did a 16-week sit-in of the Alcatraz Island, and him going on the local radio, broadcasting from Alcatraz, and just giving daily updates, because it doesn't get broadcast. The revolution will not be broadcasted. And it's important for us to be boots on the ground, but also engaged in our local independent media spaces so we can get that word out. Miigwech again for having us on the show. Line 3 was completely scary, and Gina covered a lot of that. You know, the oil itself is coming from Alberta, Canada, which is the people of the First Nations territory, and they're stealing that oil from their lands, and it comes into the United States on 3 in North Dakota, and then goes on to 5 in Michigan and Wisconsin, turns into 7 and goes into 9, and then goes back into Canada on 9, and puts onto a freighter and shipped over to China. The reason why they did that is because the West Coast put up a oil tanker ban after the XL Valdez spill back in the late 80s, early 90s. So Gina also mentioned that Canada didn't want it to go through. Manitoba took a vote against having the line go through them. I think it was called Energy East, if I remember right. And they bought out our North Dakota politicians, which wasn't that hard because of the Bakken oil fields and what happened with No Dapple. And then they also bought out for 2-3 decades the Democratic and the Republican Party of Minnesota and Wisconsin. And that's where you see Colin Peterson, 3-decade-long representative out of Minnesota, getting paid by Enbridge $5,000 per campaign season, and still pushing that line along with Governor Walz, who's a Democrat himself, very well knowing that it's going to harm the indigenous tribes of his nation, or excuse me, of his state.
That's right. It's all about money.
Yeah, and if I can just say, you are right. There isn't enough coverage on this. I mean, there were over 1,000 arrests resisting Line 3. And, you know, you didn't even see that being covered. People are risking their lives and their freedom trying to resist this. We don't want to be out in the streets. It's dangerous. I mean, I was arrested for praying. And then another time I was arrested. We're all peaceful, unarmed, nonviolent water protectors, And another time I was arrested, I was tased and my finger was broken, and very violently. And I'm not the only one. I think even the more devastating thing is to see my sisters who are in prayer and in ceremony violently ripped out of ceremony, out of praying, and brutally arrested. You have these huge officers against these tiny little women. I mean, we have video evidence of officers legitimately like pushing our grandmas to the ground. I mean, and they're just standing on the side of the road. I mean, they're not doing anything wrong, yet they're violently coming after us. I mean, this has to be serious if, people are risking their lives in the freedom, and the officers are acting as mercenaries for a foreign corporation to help poison our land. It's basically what they're doing. It's just, this is their land and their water too, and they're helping people poison it for no reason at all. It's scary. It's disheartening, but we got to keep fighting.
To clarify that, Enbridge paid the Minnesota government, the Minnesota law enforcement, to cover Line 3. They had a special task force called the Northern Lights Task Force that was trained by paramilitary organizations out of Iraq and Afghanistan, who were also out on No Dapple, the Standing Rock. And they've been catering these anti-protest teaching and tactics. And that's what's going over into Cop City now. Not to mention that Cop City is actually being put on Indigenous land itself. That's why we have land defenders. That's why Tortugula, who was murdered 3 months ago, that's why he was there. He was protecting Indigenous lands. And as you said it, Sabby, water protectors, our Indigenous movement is cross social economic boundaries, class lines. It covers all of us. And that's why we're able to stand here in Minnesota and go march and pray with the George Floyd family after George gets murdered, and why we're able to, go hand in hand with our relatives and stand at Standing Rock, stand with our East Coast natives against the Mountain Valley Pipeline that Joe Manchin just got steamrolled through Congress.
Yep.
Along with NEPTA deregulations. That conversation we just had about Bismarck being able to have that vote. Well, Joe Manchin took that vote away. He took that vote away from all of our communities by deregulating NEPTA.
It's a mess.
Yeah, we're all in this together. We're all facing the oppression. I mean, the United States government was built on genocide and slavery. The system is working exactly as it was designed. So very few can make ridiculous amounts of money off the suffering of others. And it doesn't need to be that way. It's never needed to be that way. And I think, that is another reason that there is this continued genocide upon the Indigenous population. We have the whole blood quantum thing. So if I were to I'm a tribal member, and, we have blood quantum, but if I were to have children with my husband, they wouldn't have enough of that blood quantum to be considered a tribal member. And that's just another way for them to complete that genocide upon us, so then they can take that land and do what they want with it. And all they want to do is poison it. We've seen it firsthand, and it needs to stop.
And that's the long-term plan. And they have short-term plans in hand and currently engaged. Like the whole battle on ICWA, Sabrina, I don't know if you know this, but the Indian Child Welfare Act is being challenged within the Supreme Court on racial grounds. And the lead lawyer group, the law firm that's representing the opposition, is Gibson Dunn, which represented the pipeline industries out of Standing Rock, and they also represent the majority of our hedge fund and big corporate industries across the United States. And what their intentions are is because how ICWA was originally crafted and how it was written, they're challenging that. And what ICWA is, it's designed to develop a relationship between two nations. Because Gina and I are dual citizens. We're dual citizens of the United States, and we're also a citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band of Anishinaabe. And what ICWA did is allowed the conversation between the two nations on what happens to those children. Well, how ICWA was designed, how ICWA was written, they're challenging that and calling it unconstitutional basis on race, which is not. We're not, as indigenous tribes, yes, we are a tribe, a racial group, yes, a racial group, but we're also a sovereign nation, and they're trying to erase the sovereignty in that and define us as race. And doing that with ICWA has automatic repercussions down the line. And as I said before, we had legal cases on the majority of our land claims and on these environmental cases. Well, that gives the opportunity for that opposition to take all of those claims, all of those legal cases, and challenge them in court and get them overturned based off of what they did to ICWA itself. And that's automatic erasure of our tribal nations. And I can foresee right now that them using that narrative and using that precedent set forth through SCOTUS to take our tribes out of trust. And trust, I know it might be a new word for a lot of your viewers in the group, but trust simply means it's the government funding mechanism and relationship with that tribe. And when we're taken out of trust, that pretty much dissolves our IRA government, our Indian responsible agency or government, the way they set us up, and that dissolves our tribe and our band itself from being recognized within the treaties or within the United States government. And it's not far-fetched to believe that, because Donald Trump took the Wampum Mashpee tribe out of trust in 2018, which was put into trust in 2008 by Obama. Oofta, I know I just unloaded a lot of stuff right there. But what I'm trying to get to is that ICWA case that is coming up within the next few days. If it's found unconstitutional, they have a chance to go at our children, but they also have a chance to go after all of our land and our tribal nations themselves.
It's another
grief.
Side.
I want to move on to Leonard Peltier, because I think a lot of people are not aware of this. There were some people that were aware of it last night. They mentioned it in the chat to Dr. West, but also Dr. West knows who Leonard Peltier is as well. Both of you are actually distant relatives of Leonard Peltier. Now, obviously, he was, for those who are not aware, was an indigenous activist. He was accused of killing 2 FBI agents. Now, from what I've read about his particular situation, it seems as though that is not the case. And he is being held there as a political prisoner, so to speak. So I want to talk a little bit about that so people can understand, there's more than one political prisoner. It's not just Julian Assange, for one, but for two, can you explain to people what happened with Leonard's situation?
I got this one, Gina. So, keynoting the 1960s to the 1980s, the American treaty wars, Gina and I are water protectors. We base a lot of our engagements with the United States off of our treaty rights. It got violent back in the 1960s to 1980s. We had the United States government sparked the Trail of Broken Treaties, which was a 3-month march from North Dakota all the way to Washington, D.C. that striked a 17-day sit-in of the Department of Interior, which is where a lot of this first spawns out of. A lot of our early treaty wars in the 1900s spawned it out of. And after that 17-day sit-in, the American Indian movement kind of developed along those lines. And from there, we had mass sit-ins across the United States using treaty law along with current legislation to repossess government land that was no longer used and vacated. For instance, they did a 19-month sit-in starting on I want to say it was September 1969 of the Alcatraz Island. John Trudell, the American Indian Movement, and they held that space for 19 months. Fast forwarding, we had COINTELPRO, we had the FBI, we had Nixon, the BIA, all organizing against, not just the American Indian Movement, the segregate or the Black Panthers and our allies all across, Turtle Island. They locked down and they doubled down. They infiltrated our movements. They started going after our family members, state-sanctioned violence, state-sanctioned murders. We would find our family members without hands and without teeth, because at that time, that was the only way to identify who they were. And it was purposely done to keep us silent, to shut us up. It would happen with Leonard Peltier, who was, he is one of our civil rights leaders for the American Indian Movement, along with John Trudell. A whole lot of great people that we, were on their shoulders, because, we wouldn't be here without them. Dennis Banks. They started targeting our leadership, and they went after Leonard on a ranch out of South Dakota. Oh, what was the year? It was 1975, Pine Ridge Reservation, and it was a illegal search and seizure on that land, of course, and it resulted in 2 FBI agents getting shot and killed. The judge, the defense attorney, FBI agents of the time have all came out and spoken, saying that the evidence against Leonard Peltier was wrong. It was faulty. And then that they also demand that he gets pardoned and freed. And honestly, we've been going up every year to get him pardoned. And we asked every president, Biden, Trump, Obama, they've ignored it. But every year, a really great independent media investigator did an interview with a FBI agent out of Minnesota who dealt with a lot of the Leonard Peltier case. What's his name, Gina? Red Power, Red Nation. Nick Estes from Red Nation interviewed the FBI agent that whistleblowed, telling us that every year when we go up to get Leonard pardoned, that the heads of the departments of the FBI would all write op-eds negatively against Leonard Peltier every year. And you can see that in our media, that every year you have these slams against Leonard Peltier, because he is a political prisoner. To this day, he is a warning to people like Gina and I and our water protectors all across the nation, our indigenous people that want to rise up, reminding us that, Leonard's still sitting. He's still there.
Yeah, so they have evidence to prove that he didn't do what he did. The original judge who tried him even came out and said that Leonard shouldn't be in jail. They're really using him as an intimidation factor. And, growing up, we were always warned, don't get involved. Look what happened to Leonard. And, I really, it's really sad. We cannot get intimidated. I was ran over by a cop at a George Floyd rally. I've been tased, I've been maced, I've been arrested for praying. My house has been tampered with. I've had to get cameras on my house just to make sure that people don't mess with my house anymore. I've been followed. I had to get a dash cam. One of our water protectors were falsely accused of trying to run over pipeliners. And so we really even have to have cameras on ourselves to prove that we're not doing anything wrong. And it's just an intimidation factor, and we cannot let them intimidate us. We have to keep showing up, because they want us to be silent about it. Like, that's why there's not that much media coverage. You know, they're taking those payouts to not focus on all this damage and destruction and oppression that just doesn't need to be happening.
That's right, 100%. There is a petition that you can sign for those of you watching. Free Leonard Peltier. Eric, when you get a chance, if you can put this in the chat. It says sign the petition. Here's a picture of Leonard Peltier here. And you can follow their journey as well. It talks about like what happened at, Pine Ridge. Don't let Leonard die in prison. Again, like when I read about his particular situation, I did see some similarities with what's happening with Julian Assange. Like, same thing. He's just sitting there. Right. But it's been over 40 years. And if the judge has come forward and the judge has said that, he needs to be freed by this point in time, like they should let him go. Like, it just, again, I do feel like what you said, it is an intimidation tactic. Is like, they're just trying to keep him there to make an example out of him. I feel the same way about Julian Assange. Like, I think obviously they need to let Julian Assange go. And I feel like they're just keeping him there as an intimidation tactic. And it's ridiculous, but it's just, I wanted you guys to come on to talk about this tonight, because I did find out, I noticed like when some people in the chat were saying Leonard Peltier, and I've seen that name come up a couple times during the live streams, people would contact me and ask who is this person? What happened? But not just because of that, but people need to hear that these things are happening. People need to hear that these issues are going on. Most of the time, reporters are not going into, the Appalachia, mountains. They're not going into the Blue Hills of Kentucky. They're not going into indigenous communities in the Dakotas. Like, they avoid those areas. And I don't know why, but they do avoid those areas. And so the type of, environmental pollution, the intimidation tactics from the FBI, from the police, from the politicians that happen to those communities, oftentimes is not documented. And if it is documented, there's very little coverage of it. And so I think more people need to hear about this. And I think people need to spread your message, because both of you are like probably, I think, the first people that I've ever met. And Gina, I think I met you in person at the Assange rally, right? I think you're the first two people I've ever met from the Dakotas. That's like, actually, I had a friend that moved there one time, but I never met anyone that was actually from. So I don't even know what it's like. But hearing your story and hearing my friend's story and experience there, it's a very different place from where I live. Like, those of us on the East Coast, and I think those on the West Coast as well. But also, I think oftentimes when we do talk about different groups in this country, it does seem like, to me, indigenous people are not mentioned. And that goes for politicians as well. They'll mention the Black community because they know Democratic Party knows they need us in order to win. They'll mention the Latino community. Republicans and Democrats will mention them. They'll mention, suburban, white communities, things like that. But I notice it seems like the indigenous people are often forgotten. And I think that we need to do better, not you guys, but I think those of us in independent media, we need to do better about covering these issues that's happening to indigenous communities as well. So I thank both of you for coming on to share this with us.
Language. And I do have to give a shout out to Climate Defiance. You brought up the Klobuchar protest. Mm-hmm. So we were involved with all three, just to be legitimate on this. Allegedly. We originally went in on Klobuchar in 2021. And that was organized from one of the lead organizers of Climate Defiance from Washington. He had us all ready just to walk in there and get everyone riled up and get in there. It's perfect. So when they had a chance to do it, 2 weeks ago, they consulted with us and we gave them some talking points and cheered them on. But we were just with that group during the White House Correspondents' protests. the dinner protest. So it was a whole week of great fun shenanigans, good trouble, because we went into a John Podesta speech, interrupted that when he was talking on the climate. Alex Azali, Biden's climate czar, that poor man, we hit him like 5 or 6 times throughout the last 4 weeks. I mean, I bet you he's just there crying. And those youth out of Climate Defiance, they're a bunch of young, rambunctious. And when we have discussions on infiltrators and being co-opted by the establishment, it's not just a brief text message discussion. It's let's talk everything out. So they're giving me confidence that they're going to withstand the corporate establishment from insurging and taking them over.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. And where can people find you on social media if you want to be found?
Well, I would, people out there, check out Honor the Earth, honortheearth.org, Honor the Earth on anything social media. You can find me all over there, all the good work we do. And then Gina Peltier on Facebook and Pucky Peltier on Instagram. And we always have a lot going on. Right now we're gearing up to fight Line 5 full front force. And so we have a bunch of events and activities going on that we'll be hosting in Wisconsin to bring awareness to that. That is really detrimental. It's being close to spilling because of the floods, and then they are gearing up to start construction again. And then, this September, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, is going to host a historic global climate ambition summit in New York. So we are hoping and we are planning to do something big. And we have a lot of organizations that are working with us. And there's a launching Zoom podcast on June 15th with Jane Fonda and other fossil fuel fighters in New York and across the country to give more information on that. So check out Honor the Earth. All that information is going to be posted on our website and all our social medias. But that's where you can find me. How about you, Joey? Sorry.
Well, you can find me in Sabby's chat. I'm normally watching the show, and I'm also been attending the call-in sessions. They've been pretty awesome. Other than that, I'm with Honor the Earth and also the Indigenous Environmental Network. I contract between both. And you can find me at Ernest Joseph Uppegard Peltier III on Facebook. And I think it's just Joey Peltier on Twitter.
Yeah, and Sabby, thank you so much for all you do. I did get a little starstruck when I met you, and I fumbled over my words, but thank you so much again for all you do and giving us this space.
Well, thank you guys, both of you, so much for coming on, and I'll talk to you later.
Gigawagaman.
Awesome. Those are the Peltier kids, guys. Yes, you can learn so much from them. Thank you so much. Soul says, much love to Gina and Joey. Absolutely. We need to hear about these issues. We need to hear about them.